We'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome everyone to this process pop-up with Victoria Loorz. I'm Sherry Kling. I'm the Director of Process and Faith, which is a program of the Center for Process Studies. Um, we have another event coming up later this month with an Islamic process scholar named Adis Dudereja, who'll be talking about process theology from an Islamic perspective, especially in conversation with feminist thought in Islamic uh, circles as well. So that should be very interesting. And of course, we're always working on some other topics coming up. So we'll let you know about those as we have them planned. Thank you, Jared. Jared's with us running the Zoom, and Jared put the link to that next pop-up in the chat. So we are happy to have you check that out. But let me introduce our speaker so we can get right into our topic for the evening, which is Wild Church, communal practices to reconnect spirituality and nature. What an important topic right now. And Victoria Loorz has a Master of Divinity and is a writer, spiritual guide, and wild theologian whose work emerges at the convergence of process thought, ecological consciousness, and sacred activism. She founded the Center for Wild Spirituality and is a host of the Holy Wild podcast, and she's also had initiated the Wild Church Network, which is a web of communities that gather outdoors in reverence and reciprocal relationship with the earth as sacred. She has two books. One is called Church of the Wild, How Nature Invites Us into the Sacred. And the second newest book is The Field Guide to the Church of the Wild. So I recommend both of those, and maybe some of you have already read them and are more familiar than even I am, maybe with Victoria's activities and programs. But anyway, we welcome Victoria Loorz, and why don't you just go ahead and get started, and then we'll have some conversation.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. And Sherry will be featured on our Holy Wild podcast in, I think, next month. But let's see. So, Amy, you have a wild church. And how many other people have even heard of wild church or wild spirituality? Nelson, yeah, a few of you. And some of you, it's something that you've never heard of. And yet, it's something that all of you, because you're drawn to process theology, process spirituality. It's something that you already are probably living in different ways because I feel like what this movement, this practice of wild spirituality, what it is essentially putting that the theology of Whitehead and Cobb and Thomas Berry and other evolutionary theologians into practice. And so it's something that is not new, even if the movement that's happening right now might be new. Um, so I wanted to just begin with a bit of a prayer. So let's just take a moment of silence and then a little a little prayer to center us into this moment. Spirit of the abundant earth, allow us to live in the knowledge that we are of the earth, from the earth, and will return to the earth. Tree of life, rise up in us, root us deeply into the ground, and nourish us to extend our branches out into a world with ravishing love. Awaken in us a surprised sense of awe and wonder and even fear to really open up to the reality that all of life is a blessing, a miracle, the light as well as the dark, the life as well as the death. Ancestors of this land, of all of our land, of this planet, ancestors of our place and of our blood, remind us when we so easily forget that we belong. We belong to this particular place at this particular time with these particular beings, a member of a beautiful and complex and interconnected web of aliveness. Great mystery, the Christ who dwells in and between all things, the Logos. We open our heart in gratitude and allow our minds to surrender to the need to understand everything. And instead, we surrender to our full participation in a great love story that extends before and beyond and within and between us all. Amen. So, yeah, I feel like wild spirituality is this natural evolution in the midst of a collapsing empire and a rapidly collapsing ecosystems. And for us to be able to be alive now is on purpose. That we are the ones, especially those of us, like all of you, who are feeling awakened enough to even be participating in this movement that all of you are part of. This is a really important time. There's a lot of unraveling, as we know, society, the empire, and ecologically. There's a lot of collapse that we're in the middle of. And it's at the time of collapse that something new can emerge. And it's something that's not also new because it's always what is new has been alive at the edges all along. So what we're going through right now, the time, this liminal time we're in right now, that I think all of us can feel it in a whole bunch of different ways, is a time of a lot of endings, and it's also a time of beginning, and it's also a time of return. So as we're navigating the daily, how much of the news can I actually handle, that I think all of us are struggling with. I know I am. It's also to have this larger vision, this deeper sense that all of life evolves in a spiral of becoming. And so it's something that I really deeply appreciate about process theology and process spirituality, is that it is something that is becoming. We are participating in that becomingness, and not only that, we're co-creating it. And so that's really what this wild church movement is about. Like, people come to our wild church trainings, and some of them are saying, tell me how to do this. And we always are really clear that while there are commonalities in this growing movement of over 300 and growing wild churches, which meet outside, which meet in a circle, which meet out in relationship with in the natural world, that they become a community in their own particular ways because of that diversity, and yet there's a commonality. So I think the best way to understand this whole wild spirituality movement is captured in basically our simple intention. Our intention is to restore intimate relationship with our sacred world. And we see that as a foundation of all the work that there is to do right now, which is a lot. And that foundation is grounded in relationship. It's that restoring that intimate kindred relationship with the rest of the natural world is an essential first step, because that disconnection has led to our abuse and our objectifying and using the rest of the alive world both human and more than human. And so, like Thomas Berry says, that we have broken the great conversation. And so, as it's really giving people an opportunity to enter back into relationship, not just a relationship of appreciating the beauty of the natural world, because that's still in a way objectifying as an other, but to really understand and create or remember spiritual practices that reconnect us with the world that we've been disconnected from. And we can see the tragedy of that disconnection in the way that, in the ecological collapses that are happening. But we don't see as deeply or as readily the collapse within our own spirituality, within our own relationships, within our own humanness. But it's there. Like we know who we are by our relationships. And when we've cut off relationship with anybody that's different than us, that's, another religion or another culture, when we cut that off and we say that we are the ones in and everybody else is othered and out, that's where the danger happens. That's where the abuse and the violence can happen. And so restoring that connection is the foundation of a wild church service, of anything within this wild spirituality movement. And there's a lot of these wild churches that meet like Amy's in particular places. Generally, the smaller groups meet in a circle, they spend some time together, and then they go out each individually. Almost all the wild churches do this. They go out and spend some time solo, listening deeply to the land, entering into what I call a sacred conversation. And that is just being really present with the other. In the same way you have a conversation, connection with your dog or a infant, your granddaughter or your son, or a dog, that same way that you can be with another being who's very different from you and see in them that you are connected, and see in them that you can actually enter into relationality and connection. It doesn't just end with our domestic relationships. It's how the world is held together. And so we practice this. We practice this in a whole bunch of different ways. And people go out and they don't need to understand the theology behind it. They don't need to have the experience even all of you have, and the knowledge that you have, that everything is interconnected. But when you make the time and you enter into a reverent approach of the others, something opens up within you. Something opens up in this sacred conversation that's always going on, that we're included in, that we've just been sort of blinded by our religions, by our culture, by our own experiences in our lives. But once we start opening up, and once we see, that's what happens in these wild churches. And I'll bet, Amy, you have some experiences too, is people come back from these short times of just being in that reverent state of listening and of intentionality, and something has shifted within them. They've experienced something, and then they come back together and share that experience. It's that simple. And so in a way, it's just like the process theology idea of radical relationality. It's practicing that. It's like this fundamental relationality that holds together all things isn't just an idea. It's something that is real and is happening all the time, and it's sacred. And so it's no wonder to me that the writer of the Gospel of John used the word that in the first century meant this sacred relationality, this sacredness that is in all things, this awareness and the I-thou relationship of between us and all other beings, even a stone, is what the word that the writers of the Gospel of John went to. The word is logos, and logos was the word that the gospel uses to describe who Jesus was as the Christ in the very opening of the Gospel of John. And the word logos back then was understood in a cosmological sense that had been around for about 500 years, that it was first coined by Heraclitus. And you guys probably already know about this, but Heraclitus of Ephesus, he was this Greek philosopher in the 5th century BC, and he used this word logos for the first time to articulate this kind of intelligent life force that he observed, that he knew, that he felt was embedded in and interconnecting all things. He called it a divine reason implicit in the cosmos, ordering it and giving it form and giving it meaning. And so that the people of the first century understood that word logos as meaning that. And so the writers of the Gospel of John were able to say, in the beginning was the logos, and the logos was with God, and the logos was God, and all things were created were with this logos. And logos was understood as not meaning the word, which most of us would recognize that passage. In the beginning was the word. It wasn't translated into the word until the 4th century. Up until then, it was understood as a word that to us would mean conversation. It means relationality. It means the conversation as the vehicle of relationshiping, of the becomingness of all things. That's that of love, that's the meaning of Christ. And it's been, distorted to mean almost the exact opposite. It was by the 4th century with Constantine and wanting to be the one emperor, wanting to be known, and wanting a religion that supports himself as the one emperor, that we have one deity. Um, it's a complicated historical story, but the word itself was abandoned in the church. The word sermo, that meant conversation, was abandoned in favor of the word verbum, which means a single vocable, like even smaller than a word. And it's to say, we, the authority, we will tell you what the word is. Jesus is the word, and we'll tell you what that word means. And it was really, I see it as an act of control, and as a distortion of the fullness of what this whole emerging religion meant. And so that radical relationality, I think, is even embedded within, it's embedded, I think, within most major traditions, and definitely within the Christ tradition. And it was once I understood that, really understood that this practice of conversation that didn't end with just people like me, and it didn't end with just people, but like Jesus and every single leader within my tradition, within the Old and New Testament, were called or thrust or went into the wilderness at pivotal times. Jesus went every single time he went to pray. He went into relationship with, into, not just in as a location, but went into the mountains, the wilderness, the garden, went into relationship with, because that's where the the organ which speaks, the voice of the holy happens. That's where this true conversation with the holy can happen. And it's not, there's a lot of different ways to understand that conversation, to understand that relationality. Um, some people understand it as they can, that God speaks through, you know, the natural world, speaks through a tree to me. Some people believe that it's the tree themselves that is speaking to them, that they can feel this sense of meaning and connection. And it doesn't really matter to me. It seems unimportant to me. How we conceptualize that, what matters is the experience of it. That when we really open up our lives and our hearts to be to be to into deeper relationship, into deeper, authentic, and sacred relationship with all that is. That, as John O'Donohue talks about, when you approach the holy with that kind of reverence, something, how does it go? Something great decides to approach you. That this relationship is a two-way relationship. It's not just that we love the trees in our yard or the deer that wander through the yard and eat our plants. It's not just that we love them, but that they love us back. That's what love is. It's a two-way relationship, and it's available to all of us, that sense, that reality. And so Wild Church is a communal way of entering into relationship again, of experiencing the holy and not just talking about it, of you know, being in a community where the sacred is experienced as that connective tissue that we might call love, that the Greeks called logos, that conversational reality that's in the center of all things is experienced, even if we don't have the words for it. Like, it's like, and it can happen in any connection with anything, like the the Pascal mystery of life, death, and new life is in all things. And so you're going to experience it. It's not just that nature is this beautiful la la land that we get to appreciate, but also the reality of floods and volcanoes and predation, that for one being to remain alive, for another being has to give their life. Like, these religious concepts are built into reality. It's just religion, is just religios, is just reconnection, religamenting. We need practices of reconnecting to one another, to the holy, and to the rest of the natural world, whom we've been deeply disconnected from. um yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's is that enough of a kind of an
That's
introduction to what this is about?
that's beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. That's wonderful. A few things I want to throw out back to you as responses to some of the things you said that I wrote down. One is that when you talked about that appreciating the natural world wasn't just so much about observing its beauty, and Jared, if you could pin Victoria and I to the screen, that would be great. Um, yeah. Um, that when it was not just about observing beauty, which could still be an objectification, what that made me think of was the ideas that come out of, which is very much in the process world, in terms of interreligious dialogue or deep religious pluralism, is, or even in comparative theology, is that sense that you don't just have dialogue with people of other faiths just to say, oh yeah, your faith is like so good for you, and but I've
Right.
got mine. But you actually enter in with a willingness to be changed by
That's
what you learn from the other tradition. And it's the same here, that we enter into that relationship with the natural world, willing to be changed by it and to see ourselves and it completely
right.
differently. Um, so there was that. There was also two more thoughts I'll throw out there, then you can respond to whichever or not. But then second, I was thinking when you're talking about the logos, I had done a paper back when I was in at the Lutheran school in Chicago, basically talking about how pretty much everything that was said about the logos in the prologue to the Gospel of John had already been said about Sophia, which is the feminine, the divine feminine,
Beautiful.
the wisdom of God. And so there's that interplay, which I love when we hold that together, of
Hmm.
Logos and Sophia. There's that divine marriage of masculine and feminine. And then one last thing, when you talked about predation, it just reminded me of a comment I heard from Dr. Zach Bush, who I love, who was talking about predation as a gift economy.
Mm.
You said that each
Fascinating.
thing gives its life, and
Right.
it's not that's the sacredness, that it's a gift economy, that things give up their lives to let life continue, and there's a
It changed
mutuality in that.
that understanding changed how I saw communion, you know. It
Mm,
wasn't just like I'm taking this bread and wine to remember that Jesus, you know, died for me kind of thing. It was that Jesus was saying, this is life. This is aliveness, and this will be asked of you.
mm,
And do and enter into this reality with that sense of gift, that sense of love. And I had a experience, and this might be a good way to kind of a story that can outline what I'm talking about.
yeah.
Of a while back, I had a couple years ago, I had an experience where I was in living in Bellingham, Washington, and I was walking on the trail. It was right near my house that I did every day, and and it was the middle of the day, and I was on the phone, not even paying attention to anything. And all of a sudden, this branch fell right in front of me, and like 2 feet in front of me,
Mm,
perpendicular,
mm,
enough that it was like, oh my gosh. And so I look straight up and I see this barred owl looking straight
mm.
down at me.
Ah,
And so right there was just like, oh my gosh, hello,
yeah,
I would have
yeah.
missed you. So hang up the phone. The owl flies to a tree right behind me, turn around, and I see these two little squirrels like messing around with you, like squirrels do, squirrely, on the tree that the owl was on. And then I see the owl again. We lock eyes, and then the owl flies to right next to the path I'm on. I mean, 6 feet away is a tree, and she lands on the ground, not on the tree, which I've never seen before. She lands on the ground and puts her talon out like this, and she's looking right in my eyes, like, watch this. And so I'm right now in this like liminal space, like what is happening?
Ah.
And then this one of the squirrels just runs right in front of me, straight into this owl's talon, screams as the talon, as the owl kills the little squirrel. She looks at me again and flies off.
Whoa.
I know. And so it's this like trippy experience that, you know, I've held within me, like what was that, you know.
Mm,
And but it reminds me of what you know, what you just said. It's like there's a mystery to this predation. It's not just like this built-in violence
yeah,
in reality, which is
yeah,
there too, but it's also this, you know, how do we give of ourselves until the time when we give our entire body, you know, back to the earth, you know, and that is what Jesus, I think, was trying to say. And that's how I see it. So it's just
mm,
really I, beautiful. I love that. I've never heard that before as gift economy.
yeah,
And then the willing to be changed. Like I think that's what an authentic conversation is. You know, you can't enter into an authentic conversation trying to convince somebody else of what you know what you want to, the point you want to make. It's fine, you can do that, teachers do that, you know, whatever. The doctor, you want them to tell you what it is they need to tell you. But an authentic conversation requires that you are willing to be changed, requires a vulnerability, it requires you to give up something, you
yeah,
know. And that's what, you know, like what David Bohm talked about, the physicist, in dialogue. You know, it's like the authentic conversation begins, he said, when we are misunderstood.
mm,
It doesn't end there, you know. It
mm,
doesn't mean, oh, you don't understand me,
yeah,
I'm done talking to you. It's like, oh, wow, I see this so differently, that the fact that you don't understand me is an invitation to enter into authentic conversation and to say, okay, you know, then they'll mirror back to you, and you'll go, oh wow, you're seeing this different, I see, and that adjusts what I'm saying. And this back and forthing shifts both parties, or else it's not an authentic conversation. And
Mm-hmm.
so when we enter into it with the tree or the owl, it's 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 a trip. It's like trippy to think about that that encounter is also impacting this other. That this lizard is actually changed by my taking the time to just sit there quietly and to enter into just like seeing each other.
Mm-hmm.
That I am changed because of this just intimacy of like somebody so different than me, but this other is as well. And the
Mm.
mystics talk about this all the time. It was Thomas Merton that really got me back into when I left the church completely for like 7 years. Um, and it was reading his Thomas Merton that made me come back essentially.
Ah,
And just that inherent, it's the same as the Cobb and Whitehead and all this. It's the inherent isness of the other, that inherent aliveness, and like we run out of words. But as we struggle with the words, as we are imperfect with our words, and we're okay with that, and we just sort of force ourselves to not say it perfectly, then we can bring these experiences back into the culture. We can
yeah,
bring it back into our relationships. That most people have little moments like this. I mean, I've
yeah.
I've just all it takes is somebody being willing to tell their story,
Mm-hmm.
simple as it is, and somebody else is like, I've had an encounter with a tree like that. I
Yeah,
didn't know what it was. I didn't have sacred language for it or anything. Um, but it's something we've all experienced.
yeah. Yeah, in fact, I was going to share a story, and then we can open it up to questions. I don't know if I told you this story when we were talking on your podcast, Victoria, about my encounter with the chimpanzee.
Mm,
So there's a wildlife sanctuary in North Georgia, and I went just to see it, and they have all kinds, they have big cats, they've got all kinds of zoo type animals, but they're there as a sanctuary and rescue and all that. And so there was a habitat with three chimpanzees, a male and two females, and there was an outer rim fence, and then there was an inner rim fence. And so when I first got there and walked past, there was a small group of people and the docent there at the gate looking in. And the male chimpanzee was on the other side of his side of the other fence with a really aggressive display, pounding and pounding and screaming, and the docent was saying, yeah, they're very aggressive and blah 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 blah, talking about this. So I thought, well, they're blocking the view, and I just thought I'll come back later. So I went on my way, and when I came back, I was by myself. There's nobody else there, and so I went to this gate and was watching. And again, he came out, pounding and screeching and
mm,
screaming, and I just looked at him,
mm.
and I just said, you are doing such a good job protecting your family.
Aw,
And he got down on his haunches and he just looked into my eyes and was completely calm. And it was just like, you see me,
wow.
you
Yeah.
see me, and you
And that's
know.
all he needed.
Yeah.
The animal communicator, Anna Breitenbach, do you know her?
Yeah, I've seen the videos of her.
Yeah.
She's
Yeah.
amazing.
She did the same thing with a jaguar that was
Jaguar. Yeah.
so angry,
Yeah.
and they couldn't help him. And it wasn't until Anna came and told the sanctuary, you know, lead whatever person to just see him and
Yeah.
acknowledge his power. And that was it. It was
Yeah.
the aggressiveness was that's a beautiful story, Sherry.
Yeah.
Wow.
And in fact, when I that
Wow.
like a year or so later, I went to the American Academy of Religion conference in Atlanta, and Franz de Waal, who is a
Yes.
primatologist with Emory, was there speaking. It was when his book had come out about like morality without God and stuff like that. And so I asked him a question. I said, I had this experience. I briefly described it. And then I said, I wonder if you've had something similar. And he
Mm.
got like very kind of nervous, and he was like, well, I won't share blah blah blah, but my own. But I will say that probably every primatologist has had some experience like that.
Well, I mean, he has a book that's about that, like Emma, or one of
Oh,
his.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's the one I have of his.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's true for all creatures, it's not just the ones that are most like us or the ones that are domesticated or whatever. Like it's
Right.
just interesting to ask ourselves, why am I okay with the idea that I can understand what my dog is saying, but I can't understand what the grasshopper's saying? It's
Yeah.
just it becomes like, well, that doesn't make any sense. It's
Right.
almost just logical
Right.
once you see the blindness behind it, and it's just a matter of that what you just expressed and what you did. That is a sacred conversation
Yeah.
of entering into like, I thou relationship,
Hmm.
reverent relationship with this other, and
Yeah.
regarding them with respect.
Yeah.
It-
Yeah.
and then them regarding you back.
Right.
What a gift
Right.
you walked away
That's
with,
the,
and they
yeah,
walked away with. It's
that's
always
the
reciprocal.
stunning thing too is that you get it back and you realize that you're not just like you said, you're not just the subject in looking at the object and relating
Right.
to the objectness of it. You're
Right.
seeing it as sacred and it sees you in the same way.
And if just that one thing were to shift in our worldview,
Yeah.
it would have a crumbling effect on everything else.
Right. 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 Well, let's have some further dialogue. Why don't we if you want to make a comment or ask a question, if you could raise your virtual hand is probably the easiest because we can then see you very clearly, but there's not that many of us. We're all pretty much on one screen. You can also just wave your hand at me. Or if you have a question you'd like to put in the chat, you can do that as well. Yes, Tom, you can unmute and jump in.
Yeah, Victoria, I wonder if you could say a little bit more about your story, how you obviously had some kind of evolution here, and what were the steps in that?
Yeah. I mean, I could talk a lot about it, but I'll try to shorten it. So I didn't grow up in religion. We were a Christmas and Easter kind of Methodist. I just figured I was a Christian because I wasn't Jewish. And but basic cultural. And then in my 20s, I had like a super intense encounter with Jesus and entered into the evangelical church. But very quickly I found real spiritual sustenance in the mystics. And so I had these sort of parallel experiences. Um, and then I ended up going to seminary. And after seminary, I was working with an evangelical um, organization, Relief and Development, World Vision. And my project was to address creation care for the evangelical church. So I wrote this really beautiful little booklet packet thing that was sent to 50,000 evangelical churches. It was about caring for creation using their own scriptures, their own, language, because I was so shortly affiliated with them. And, people, this is 35 years ago, and people were open to it more than they expected. Um, and yeah, so I started to connect with other, sort of Christian environmentalists, and so that's kind of how it began. And so it began by this project, but the deeper I went into it, it was like that was the portal.
Mhm.
And then, I was a pastor for many years, and I would always be interested most in the way that people live more deeply in relationship with God, essentially. Um, but I wasn't seeing people. I was feeling like there was a wall, like we did all these cool spiritual practices, and people would like them, some of them. Some people would come to my things, but after after several years, I basically got burnt out in the church and I left. And in those 7 years that I was not a pastor and I didn't go to church, I started a nonprofit with my son that was at first called Kids versus Global Warming. And my son, 15 years ago, was kind of like Greta. He quit school by 8th grade and was traveling around the world giving speeches to millions of people about, live as if our future matters was the thing. So just sort of deepening into the climate movement, essentially. And both of us got burnt out in that. And it was in that place. And I went back into the church and started to explore this in that place of burnout. I would go down the street to this huge live oak tree that went down to the ground and go into the secret center of this oak tree. And that's where I started to feel myself thaw and heal. And I realized then that I had experienced the numinous, I had experienced the sacredness most often in relationship with nature. And yet, when I was a church leader, that was only something that you go to do a retreat after you're done with all the spiritual stuff, You can go kayaking after this. And it just was a disconnect. In fact, I'd been told as a pastor a few times, like, God isn't a tree and you're what was the word? Tree hugging dirt worshiper, things like that. So it felt like, I got to a place of like, do I need to really just make a choice? Do I need to leave Christianity altogether in order to be faithful to my actual experience of the sacred? Or do I need to just suck it up and just don't talk about any my actual experiences and just kind of stay in line? And it was in that query, in that authentic question, that I began to deepen into this, to my own, sacred stories, the Bible, and go with different lenses. And I realized this is totally about a deep relationship with the rest of the alive world, that all of, that the word wilderness in Hebrew means the organ which speaks. Like, that's the first definition of it. The second definition is wilderness. Like, and it just reprogrammed all the stories, and I could just see it differently. And then I was doing like soul work with different groups that were in nature, and recognizing that people were changing and people were transforming in these soul to soul kind of nature experiences that they said were very psychological, not spiritual. And I was like, no, this is the thing I've been looking for. This is the thing I've been trying to live into and invite people into. And that's when I started to explore, is there a way to do church, to do this gathering that does respect that reality? And so I started the first wild church 10 years ago, and I just kind of thought I was making things up. I just went out into, the trail outside of the village, and we sat in a circle, and I'm like, all right, so everybody just go like talk to rocks and trees and come back in 20 minutes. And they were like, that's crazy. I don't get this. And they all came back after just one experience with zero explanation. Like, I'd been living into it for like 3 years, but I didn't know how to explain it in 10 minutes, And they all came back and said, we need more time. I've been hiking these trails for my whole life, and I've never stopped to really listen and to know that that is a sacred interconnection. And so, I felt like I was making things up until I started meeting other pastors who were sort of creating something very similar all over North America. And after about 9 months, there was about 30 of us that were meeting once a month on Zoom like this to just support each other. And I said, this is a thing. It's bigger than us, and we need a name for it. And that's when we decided to call it the Wild Church Network. And about a year later, I started the Seminary of the Wild, where we work with people weekly over a year or 2 years. And, so that they are deepening into their relationship with their place and coming back for that extended community to deepen into their own experience of this, to discover what is it that I'm being called to bring into the world at this time. So,
Thanks.
yeah, thanks, Tom.
Great. Since we've been talking, we've got 2 questions in the chat. So first, Nancy Hartsock wrote, I had a painful day today. Many trees across from our home were plowed down due to make room for a new business, a garden nursery, but still, as I heard their bodies fall outside, I felt physical pain and stayed mostly inside. I remembered a poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins called Binsey Poplars, which helped me channel my grief. Any thoughts that can quiet my pain? I've had a similar experience too.
Yeah, me too. Like it's hard living in the Pacific Northwest. You see these big trucks with these, carcasses of beings. Um, I don't know that quieting your pain is what is needed, you know. I think what is needed is to honor the witness of your grief, these sacred ones have been lives have been taken, and not in that gift economy kind of way, but in more of the violent way. And your witness of them is a gift. Um, we in our culture don't know how to grieve. And so just like the Paschal mystery is incomplete without that. But what happens between the loss and the new life is grief. It's the only part that we have agency over. And so how do we, and I think we're going to have to, maybe it's a call into that, into a gift of there's just so many grief doulas that I'm hearing about, people who are willing to hold that pain, willing to experience that pain for another. And that's what you've done. Um, and so it's with gratitude, and perhaps there's ways that you can, maybe it'll lead to something else, but I think just the something else can be being fully present, without having to rush through it, and just allow it to be, talk about it, bring others into it. Yeah, thank you for sharing that and for being willing to um, witness and feel it. It's an essential, it's an essential part. It's like we can say things need to, this empire needs to collapse in order for a new way of being to emerge. Like that sounds good. And I think that's true. And in a way it is in some ways encouraging. And it's going to be extremely painful. And a ritual, yeah, absolutely. Any ritual you can do, like um, anything that you can do to honor them, I think is a gift to them, to the other beings who witnessed it as well, to yourself, honoring your own soul and honoring the holy. It's like that's exactly it. Yeah, I know their homes have been lost.
Yeah.
When there was these annual gigantic wildfires in California and the whole, everywhere now. But one of the huge ones back in 2017, I was living in Ojai, California, and this 200,000 acres, ate up everything around Ojai. It was sure to go. We were evacuated. And, for some reason, the wind changed and this little town survived. But all the places that we had been meeting as a wild church were dust.
Mm.
And so we it was Ash Wednesday, and we held the Ash Wednesday in the ashes. There's nothing wrong with nature worship. Um, and I invited the indigenous Chumash elder to come, and she invited her friend who was oh, I knew I'd forget the name. It's a Japanese religion that gosh dang it.
Shinto.
Thank you. He was a Shinto priest and a Lutheran priest. And so we held the space, and everybody went wandering and came back with little bones of birds and
Mm.
ashes of trees, and um, it was somber. It was beautiful. Um, the Shinto priest sort of yelled at the mountain that the mountain um, was not holding up their end of
Mm.
the deal of protecting this valley, and the mountain was saying, "Well, you haven't held up your end. You're not who just said that." Um, like Celeste just said, you haven't properly worshiped me, and yeah, it was just this. It didn't change the pain of the loss. Billions of beings lost their life in terror.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yet it was like all we could do. And it was, a lot of vigils and stuff had been done for the people who lost their houses or lost human lives, but nothing else was done to honor those
Mm.
other beings that had lost their lives. So I think this is part of our calling. Yeah, somebody told me, uh, was pushing back, just to address your question, Celeste. Um,
Well, the Celeste was in response to Abraham's question,
oh, okay.
right above that.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
There it is. So somebody had said, you are worshiping trees. You're doing nature worship. And I said back to them, like, can you define worship for me? And he couldn't. But I said, well, worship means worthship. It means the worthiness. And so worship is giving back to the other that they are worthy, And so in a way, that's why it doesn't scare me, of nature worship. It doesn't scare me. I get where people are going, that um, that they're feeling threat, that there's a threat to a worship of God, that's the only one that you can worship. But I think on another level, I think we need to acknowledge the worthyship of all beings and of all things. And so finding rituals and practices that that make that makes sense within your tradition. So if you are, um, there are wild churches who are within a particular Christian denomination, and the way that they hold the space is that God is with us, and God can speak to us through any means. And we are worshiping God along with all of these trees, which the Psalms say are worshiping God all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
there might be another wild church. There's wild churches who are grounded in Buddhism. There's wild churches that are grounded even in Islam. I met
Mm.
imam who does a wild church, and there's ones who are very spiritual but not religious, and so they avoid you know Christian language because the people in that community have been so wounded by the church. And so it's not a new religion. It's a way of fully embodying your own tradition, and reintroducing what has been disconnected. Jesus literally prayed every single time in relationship with wilderness and with the natural world. I mean, I studied it and was like, really, is there not one exception to this? And there's not.
Mm.
And we are good now as good Christians of saying, we're going to study, we're going to practice prayer, we're going to do all these different kinds of prayer, but we never practice wilderness. We never practice um, going into relationship with wilderness, into the organ which speaks in holy words as prayer. And that's where we pray. And so I think it's just within your tradition, within your worldview. It doesn't require you to shift to another religion or anything, but to open up within your, that's what I had to do within my own tradition, within your own language, within your own understanding, within your own community. How is severance from the rest of the alive world impacting um, how I am being a person of a spiritual person, a human in relationship with all of life?
I was just want to add that to me, it seems that the only reason, the only worldview within which worship of nature would be in tension or a threat to worship of God is a view that puts God as only transcendent.
Right.
Because if God is immanent in the world, if the world is basically either the body of God or the clothing of God, if we see the world as infused with God everywhere, then worship of nature is worship of God.
Right. And for most of human history, including all of the, theologians of the early of our past, knew nature as the first book of God.
Right.
And later it became the second book of God. Now it's been downgraded to no book of God.
Right.
But most of human history and most of Christian tradition, nature is absolutely integrated in our relationship with God. And so it's really, that's part of it too.
Hmm.
Yeah. Thanks, Sherry. You're the real theologian.
No, hey, you probably have more Bible knowledge than I do. Any other before we close, any other questions or comments? I'm
No,
gonna put
this is a great response too. I love what you said there.
thanks. I'm gonna put in the chat the link to another organization that you all might just want to check out, the Center for Deep Green Faith. Are you familiar with them, Victoria?
Yeah, I mean, I've read
With
the
Robin Gottfried and Jerry, oh, his last name is escaping me. It's more like sort of swirling in the Episcopal world, and it was started with their Center for Religion and Environment. It's at Swanee, but then the school changed the direction of that center, and Robin, meanwhile, was retired, and so he
Mm,
and Jerry went on to create the Center for Deep Green Faith. But what it was, while I was at Swanee and the center was with Swanee, that we started the first Deep Green Faith conference, and we
cool.
had two of them while I was there. Anyway, they do monthly webinars as well. So I'm going to email Robin and Jerry and say that they need to have you on,
Ah,
Victoria.
cool. Love
Yeah,
to meet
but
them.
and they do a nice certification in I forget what they call it, but it's basically in care of creation or something like
Eco
that.
spirituality. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So
Awesome.
anyway, just for y'all's information, I put the link in there. But well, thank you so much, Victoria. This was such a beautiful, really beautiful conversation, and yeah, just very delightful and sacred. Is so true.
Thank you so much. Well, it's an honor to be with you all. And, it's hard what can you say in 20 minutes?
Yeah,
But thank you for inviting me and for your, Nelson, I feel like I've seen you a few times in different things. Yeah. And I think Rolo, have I seen you before? Yeah. So what a gift, and many blessings to you and all of you and all that you are called to be and do at this really, really urgent time.
yeah,
To have spiritual leaders in a whole different way of understanding spiritual leadership, of just being that love no matter what.
yeah. Amen. All right. Well,
Much love
thank
to
you
you all.
all. Thank you all for
Yeah.
coming, and we hope to see you again soon at future events. And please go to our website and look up that next event in August, and maybe we'll see you down the road. Thank you again, Victoria.
Thank you. Take care.
Blessings to
Bye-bye.
all.
Much love.